Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I have a few reminders while folks are still joining. We'd like to keep our webinars conversational and welcome your questions throughout. You can send the questions to our panel through the Q&A button located on your Zoom control panel. And we will try to answer as many questions as we can live. Some we will take during the presentation and others at the end during a Q&A session. You can follow today's conversation on Twitter, as we'll be live tweeting throughout the webinar at Rio_SEO. And please use the hashtag RioWebinar. Finally, we will send a link to the webinar recording within the next 24 hours. So look out for a follow-up email from our marketing team. Again, thank you for joining and welcome. My name is Mick Wilson. I'm Vice President of Customer Success here at Rio, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. Next slide. We have a great group of panelists today. Both Ryan and Nigel I've worked with for many years. Before we jump in, I just wanted to introduce both Ryan and Nigel. Ryan, can you introduce yourself to the group first?
Yeah, thank you, Mick. I sit on the client success team here at Rio. I've been in the local search space for, well over a decade at this point. Got into local back when Google Business Profiles was still called Google Places, for those that remember that. I've been at Rio for just about 8 years, and in my role, I work closely with our account team, our product team, and our clients to deliver successful outcomes.
Nigel?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Nigel Atkinson. I'm based in what is usually sunny San Diego, California. I've been with Rio for a little over 10 years, and I'm responsible for the overall health and welfare of a portfolio of clients in the retail, healthcare, services, and financial sectors.
Thanks, guys. Next up, before we get started, we wanted to run a quick poll. There will be 8 answers to choose from. You should see it on your screen now. Please pick the option that most aligns with your business. Let's go ahead. All right. So are we going to post the poll results now or wait? All right, here we go. So as you can see here, we've got kind of a mix as expected, but good representation from financial services, healthcare, hospitality, and restaurant business as well. Moving along here. We've got just a few bullets on our methodology. There's, we have a data set of over 164,000 locations throughout the US, Canada as well. The time frame for the data was January of 21 through December of 2022. We have the data divided into multiple verticals. You can see them listed here: service businesses, financial sector, restaurants, retail, healthcare, hospitality, multifamily, residential as well. The metrics we used are organic search volume, map pack views from local search, as well as conversion clicks, things like click to website, phone call, and driving directions. Let's start with some aggregate trends here. For reference, the figures we see are aggregated from our client against those verticals I just covered. And overall, the search views continue to regain traction, as we've seen over the last several quarters. You can see, a few dips here. Both of these dips are related to pandemic events, and to be expected. We kind of have seen over the last 2 quarters a steady increase. Next up, we're looking at conversion actions. So these are the top trend line is total clicks, and then plotted in the bar graphs, we've got clicks to call, clicks to website, and clicks for driving directions as well. You can see we call out the downward trend in local conversions, kind of persisted in first few months of 22 and began to come back up in March. The total clicks on search listings did dip again during the holiday season. So next up, I'm going to hand it over to Ryan for service businesses.
Awesome. Thank you, Mick. Yeah, so as Mick said, I mean, there's a couple sort of overarching trends that will probably be mentioned on every single slide, COVID being the obvious one. When we think about, the service business vertical, these are businesses that are sort of personal care, spas, salons, gyms, places that were, maybe even more than other verticals really impacted by COVID, restrictions, closures, et cetera, especially, in the early days of the pandemic. You can see, heavy declines specifically around the timing for, the Delta variant in the summer months of 2021. And again, just after holiday in the beginning of 2022 with Omicron, right? So again, a lot of variants, heavy impacts from COVID. And as we zoom in on the specific conversion metrics in the next slide, you could sort of see that story playing out here as well. But I think one of the main takeaways is if you look at clicks for driving directions, right, from the beginning of 21 through the end of 2022, there really is this slow and steady recovery, albeit with a slight setback in the early part of 2022, which ultimately is exactly what you want to see, right? Again, thinking of what types of businesses we're talking about here, you almost have to be there in person for that business to succeed, right, and survive. And so that's in a sense a success story, seeing that recovery overall in driving directions.
So next, Nigel is going to cover financial services.
Yeah, so financial businesses, they saw some volatility across almost every metric pretty much through May 2022. So we can see here searches, views, and clicks plummeted to their lowest point in June and July of 21. You're always going to get large fluctuations in the financial sector. This is obviously due to many, many reasons, mostly economy, but higher interest rates, elevated inflation. And obviously folks are always wary of any kind of talk of recessions. And then banks are also experiencing some higher loan losses, and growth is generally slowing for life insurance, which made 2022 a fairly unpredictable year for financial services brands specifically. And then if we move on to the next slide, we get a slightly happier picture. It's not all necessarily doom and gloom, because during the summer of seasons 21 and 22, there were pretty much high points for financial services in terms of total conversion actions. One thing that we did notice is that consumers tend to call financial services about twice as often as they click through to find information on its website. Financial services brands could outshine their competitors with having a high level of customer service available for consumers trying to get in touch with a specific branch location. Then, obviously moving forward into 2023, 24, we might see some different trends. Obviously, when we have those numbers, we'll go over those with you.
So now we're jumping into the full service restaurant vertical.
Got it. So for full service restaurants, this is your, think of dine in, right? A sit down restaurant experience, which again, impacts of COVID, really can't be understated there. I think in a lot of senses, and we'll see this in the next slide, there were some sort of shifts in consumer behavior in that period as well. But again, you see the volatility here. It aligns pretty closely with the Delta resurgence, Omicron variant as well. Beyond the COVID impacts, though, thinking through what full service restaurants and the restaurant industry as a whole has had to deal with, staff shortages, higher costs in food and ingredients, also rising customer expectations, right? As sort of, again, the experience shifted throughout COVID. Folks came to expect a different level of cleanliness, a different level of service, which really put a lot of restaurants in a tough spot. As we shift into looking at the conversion metrics, you can see the overall trend is not necessarily a happy one here, right? If we look at total clicks, I think one really important thing to point out, though, is when we look at which engagements, which conversions are included in these insights, one of the big missing pieces, well, there's two really, right? One is clicks for reservations, right? So if you've got that booking link enabled on your listing, that's not actually captured here in this time period. Also, online orders, right? So for a lot of these sit-down restaurants that did sort of pivot toward providing takeout or even partnering with delivery services, those clicks aren't fully represented here. And so I think, we see this overall downward trend, but I think a lot of that is actually just a shift from these three conversion metrics toward some of the other built-in GBP metrics, which again, just aren't represented in this data set. If we zoom in though on the types of clicks, right, and look at, if you can see in the beginning of 2021, the least common click type was clicks for driving directions, right? And over the course of this 24-month period, you see clicks for driving directions recovering, albeit at the expense of clicks to call and clicks to the website. And so I think, again, leaving those dedicated CTAs aside, folks clicking through to the website or clicking to call, presumably, that's what they're doing, right? Placing a takeout order or, looking to make a reservation to visit in person. So there's sort of this trade-off there, right? Which at the end of the day, seeing clicks for driving directions recover just indicates that people are, number one, the demand is there. Number two, that they're, comfortable going back out and visiting restaurants again in person.
Yeah, I think another point too, I know that we saw early during the pandemic was people calling ahead to check on, any type of restrictions a restaurant had, if they were indeed open, because there was this lack of uncertainty and trust maybe to some degree because everything was changing so quickly, and maybe what they saw as the hours in Google and Apple and elsewhere. So that I think contributes to this as well.
Yeah, it's a great point. And actually, there was a period where Google put a message on every listing, regardless of the vertical, encouraging searchers to place a call to validate the information. So even if you were, keeping things up to date regularly, using the API, Google still had that message on there to have consumers call and verify. And that was one thing, that we've seen when you look at like the year-on-year numbers across almost every vertical. Clicks to call are down from 21, and that's a big reason for it. Google was actively telling people to call on top of, make your point about folks just wanting to confirm or validate the information, or validate availability. So there's definitely a trend there across verticals. Looking at kind of a related vertical, right? Quick serve restaurants, not quite as volatile as what we saw with sit down, fewer fluctuations. Just thinking again of the delivery model, right? This is, drive through. Quick serve is just less person to person interaction. It was easier for that sort of industry to continue on its normal course. Obviously some seasonal variations there, but in general, fewer fluctuations than we saw with sit down restaurants. And then looking at the clicks, you can see these sort of summer peaks here. This is fairly consistent with what we see seasonally. Some COVID impact, you could argue here, but I think in general, we see the quick service restaurants just weren't as strongly impacted over the past few years as full service. Again, thinking through the delivery model and the fact that there's just, it's easier to create that barrier, right, and sort of lessen the impact from COVID.
Now we move into retail.
Yeah, sort of similar story with retail. It was another industry that had some very large fluctuations in their metrics over the last few years. We see the greatest local search interest and activity in spring of 21, sort of aligns with when lockdown measures eased across the US. And then of course, everybody just went out and spent all the money that they'd saved while they're at home. And there was a lot of different trends, certainly from sort of clothing choices, and a lot of the retailers decided to sort of change the type of clothes. They had new designs. They just re-upped they took a look at all their different clothing lines and said, well, nobody really wants anything quite as formal as they had before. And so they went a little bit more casual, which was the trend as most people were working from home. A lot of changes on that one.
Yeah, a lot of folks went full comfort mode, I would say.
Yeah, a lot of sweats, a lot of casual stuff. Same with shoes as well.
Any points here on conversion actions?
Yeah, so clicks to directions to a specific website or call a store. Those trends were fairly solid. Obviously, consumers were trying to reach retailers using as many methods as they could. I think you fall into what Ryan mentioned in the previous slides for restaurants is that, nobody really knew if their hours were necessarily correct. So there was a lot of calls. There could well have been a lot of calls generated by people now looking for jobs. All that kind of stuff affected a huge increase in a lot of calls. Another thing is you've got to remember that in the retail sector, customer service is king as well. It's very crucial.
So moving forward to healthcare now, Nigel, I know you've got quite a bit of experience here with some of your client base.
Yeah, and healthcare is an interesting one because, as we know, this whole COVID was all related to healthcare. And so we did see some cooling on healthcare searches, but views skyrocketed in October 22 because the cold and flu season began. And so we were so used to everything was COVID, everything was the next strain, everything was Omicron. And then suddenly everybody forgot about the flu and cold season. Then suddenly there was all these clicks as winter sort of kicked in. People needed to get vaccinations, they needed to get the cold remedies, etc. And so there was a lot more activity along here during that period. But moving on to conversions, those actions were a little bit less volatile. We're only seeing sort of slight changes there. I think there's a lot more stability in these marketing metrics over the past few years. It's not a surprise. because there's a lot of healthcare concerns everywhere. It's not just COVID. There are respiratory viruses, there's mental health, there's everything. And it's fairly continuous in that everybody at some point is going to get sick.
Moving into the hospitality vertical now.
Yeah, so hospitality is another one that, again, thinking through the impacts that COVID had, these are just external factors. There wasn't a lot you could do about it, right? Travel, all but came to a halt, practically. Business travel, folks were not taking vacations, right? And that obviously had a big impact. When you look at some of these declines, it does map pretty closely with, you see the spike early in 21 as things were starting to look better on that front. Some of the restrictions were lifted. Places like Hawaii started to open up, visitation again, and then you have a big decline as Delta came back into the picture, and sort of stayed flat throughout Omicron. And then as that concern eased, as the severity, it became clear the severity was not as high, we saw a lot of pent-up demand again. Folks coming back. This is spring break peaks, right? When you look at the two highest points here, it's spring break in both years. And I think in 2022, you could argue that maybe Omicron dented that enthusiasm a little bit. Similar story here, right? This is the story of recovery, right? The summer months in 2022, that's the high point, exactly what you want to see. Clicks for driving directions, slow and steady increase. There's some seasonality at play, some COVID impact at play. But I think the important question, right, for this vertical to ask is, how relevant, when you look at year-on-year comparisons, and this could be true across verticals, right? But how relevant is it going to be to tell this year-on-year story, right? With the impact of COVID really just turning things upside down. It looks completely different, right, than your normal sort of year-on-year comparisons would look. But again, I think overall the trend, moving up and to the right, seeing the growth mostly in clicks for driving directions, it's exactly what you want to see. And similar to the point about restaurants, we have to caution that, all of the if you look at the hotel search experience in local, all of those booking clicks are not represented here in this data set, right? So this is more, the post conversion, if you will. If you're clicking for directions, you likely already have made a reservation. This is more of a lagging indicator than anything.
I think it might also tie in with, I forget exactly when the mask mandate for flying was dropped, but that spike in July 2022 could be a reason for that as well, when people are like, well, I don't really want to spend 6 hours on a plane with a mask on. But once that was dropped, I feel like a lot more people were flying and obviously making reservations at different hotels.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Now we're going to move into the multifamily channel.
All right, well, this is an interesting one. Even though the economy has been slightly turbulent, actually vacancy rates are quite low across most major cities. And a lot of consumers, whether they want to or not, are actually returning to major cities to work in offices again. Some people obviously don't want to. And we did see that from the pandemic, consumers sort of really value their home spaces. And they were spending a lot more time in there. So we've seen a lot more highs and lows in the multifamily residential vertical over the past 2 years, as you can see in this slide. And then switching to conversions, conversions level out in the second half of 2022. There's some reasons why the real estate market, it's a bumpy road. It's based on, population growth, high employment, good wages, people willing to spend money on goods and services. The unemployment rate has continued to decline. I believe it's down to like 3.5% in December 2022. And then also wages and salaries have increased in 2022 as well. So a lot of people have been looking, while interest rates were low, obviously they're a little higher now. This led to a focus on a lot of home buying in these past several years. So anyway, there's a lot of competition, unfortunately, with people buying homes, limited inventory. So a lot of prospective home buyers were forced to continue renting with the multifamily residential businesses.
So this covers our findings for 2022. We're already a quarter through 2023, and we're seeing some pretty interesting findings. I know our next quarter of data will be interesting because Google just recently rolled out a change in the way they're measuring some of the key insights, such as searches, clicks, etc. And just looking at early reads of our data, it does vary quite a bit so far by vertical. So look for our next report and webinar coming in the next 2 quarters. Just to recap a couple the key takeaways. We saw a big shift with service businesses and retail brands on the conversion metrics as variations of the virus, Omicron, Delta, etc., kind of shifted, ebbed and flowed the impact to businesses as consumers were adjusting to kind of the new normal. That's a key takeaway, I think. Although we still have the COVID-19 virus around, I think everyone's kind of learned to deal with it. Folks that are going to get the vaccination have the different variants recently are less. The effects for most folks are less. And this builds confidence with consumers. I think businesses have shifted, put in good policies that help people make comfortable or help folks feel more comfortable visiting businesses, traveling, going out and about. And I think as we go through 2023, we aren't going to see as many ebbs and flows, those spikes and valleys that we saw in the data in 2022. Ryan touched on hospitality and the restaurant verticals. I think that a lot of the volatility, like we shared, will kind of be behind us. And so in 2023, I expect more normal trends, which I would call typically are seasonal, right? You see the spring break, the summer travel season, and then kind of the holiday season. And after the holidays, you've kind of got a lull, January, February, before kind of things pick up. And I expect us to kind of get back to that trend. So that's a wrap for the content we have to cover today. I don't wanted to cover any Q&A. I'm not seeing any questions at this point. So maybe we'll give everyone a minute or so. If anyone has a question, feel free to pop it in Q&A. And if not, that's okay too. So I'm not seeing anything. We will call it a wrap. We'll be sending out a follow-up to all attendees and registered guests of the webinar today with the material we covered and a poll as well. So thanks everyone for joining, and we hope to see you again soon. Bye.
Thanks everyone.